No one dared help the filthy, alien girl. So I gave her a warm shower. The spaceship crash shook the entire forest. Trees snapped like twigs as the small alien vessel carved a burning path through the woodland outside the small town of Greendale. Jake Miller, a 30-year-old mechanic with calloused hands and a kind heart, had been hiking when he saw the streak of light tear through the evening sky. Unlike most people who would run away from a potential disaster, Jake ran toward it. That was just who he was, always ready to help. The crash site smoldered when he arrived. Broken metal and strange materials littered the ground. Jake approached cautiously, his phone ready to call emergency services. But what he found made him freeze in his tracks. Among the wreckage sat a small figure. Not human, that much was clear. Her skin was a pale blue color with what looked like patches of silver scales. She had large, almond-shaped eyes that reflected the moonlight like pools of mercury. Her hair, if you could call it that, moved slightly as if underwater, despite the still night air. "Hello?" Jake called out, keeping his distance. Are you okay?" The alien girl looked up, her body trembling. She made a soft chirping sound that Jake couldn't understand. But her fear was universal. "It's okay," Jake said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." He approached slowly, noticing now that the alien's clothes were torn and she was covered in what looked like blue-black mud or some kind of oil. It gave off a strange smell, not entirely unpleasant, but definitely not from Earth. Jake knelt down a few feet away from her. "My name is Jake," he said, pointing to himself. The alien watched him carefully, then mimicked his gesture, pointing to herself and making a sound that Jake couldn't hope to pronounce. It sounded like Elia to his human ears. "Elia?" Jake tried. The alien nodded, seeming to understand his attempt at communication. A noise from further in the woods made both of them turn. Flashlights bobbed between the trees. Other people from town had seen the crash and were coming to investigate. "We should get you out of here," Jake said, not sure if the alien understood his words but hoping his tone conveyed the urgency. He offered his hand. Elia hesitated, looking at his outstretched palm with uncertainty. Then, slowly, she reached out. Her hand had only 4 fingers and felt cool to the touch. Jake helped her to her feet, noticing she was small, maybe 5 feet tall, and incredibly light, as if her bones were hollow. The voices from the search party grew louder. Jake made a quick decision. "Come with me," he said, guiding her away from the crash site. "My truck is not far." As they moved through the forest, Jake could see Elia was limping slightly. Her strange, mud-like covering seemed to be drying on her skin, cracking in places. She looked uncomfortable. They reached Jake's old pickup truck just as the search party arrived at the crash site behind them. Jake helped Elia into the passenger seat, noticing how she studied everything with intense curiosity. She touched the dashboard, the seat belt, the window, all new to her. "Seat belt," Jake said, reaching across to buckle her in. She flinched at first but then stayed still, watching his hands. Jake started the truck and pulled away slowly, trying not to attract attention. In his rearview mirror, he could see people gathering at the crash site, some pointing flashlights into the woods. Someone had already called the authorities. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance. "Let's get you somewhere safe," Jake said, more to himself than to Elia. The drive back to town was tense. Jake took the back roads, avoiding the main streets where someone might spot his unusual passenger. Elia sat quietly, occasionally making those strange chirping sounds when they passed something that caught her interest. "Almost there," Jake said as they approached his small house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a small 2-bedroom place he'd inherited from his parents, but it was private and safe. He pulled into the garage and closed the door behind them before helping Elia out of the truck. Under the harsh garage lights, he could see her condition better. The blue-black substance covering her wasn't mud at all, it seemed to be some kind of protective coating that was now drying out, causing her obvious discomfort. Her skin beneath looked raw in places. "You need help," Jake said, pointing to the dried substance. "Bath. Water." He mimed washing himself. Elia tilted her head, then nodded slowly. Inside the house, Jake led her to the bathroom. He turned on the shower, keeping the water lukewarm in case her species had different temperature preferences. Elia watched with fascination as water sprayed from the shower head. "It's water," Jake explained, putting his hand under the spray. "For cleaning." He pointed to her dirty state, then to the shower, trying to explain without words. Elia seemed to understand. She chirped something and then, to Jake's surprise, began to remove her strange clothing. "Whoa!" Jake turned around quickly, giving her privacy. I'll get you a towel and some clothes." He hurried out of the bathroom, face burning. He found a clean towel and some old clothes that might fit her small frame, sweatpants with a drawstring and an old t-shirt. He knocked on the bathroom door before cracking it open just enough to set the items on the counter. "I'll be in the kitchen," he called out. "Take your time." While Elia showered, Jake tried to think clearly. An alien. In his house. Taking a shower. What was he supposed to do now? Call the government? But what would they do to her? The news always showed aliens as threats to be contained or studied. Elia didn't seem dangerous, just lost and afraid. His phone rang, startling him. It was his friend Mark from the fire department. "Jake. Did you hear? Something crashed in the woods. They're saying it might be a meteorite or maybe even a satellite." "Yeah, I heard something," Jake said carefully. "The whole town's talking about it. Police, fire department, even some guys in black suits are heading out there. You should come check it out." "I'm actually pretty tired," Jake lied. "Long day at the shop." "Suit yourself. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow." Jake hung up just as he heard the bathroom door open. He turned to see Elia standing in the hallway, looking completely transformed. The shower had washed away all the blue-black substance. Her skin now gleamed like polished opal, with patches of silver scales that caught the light. Her hair, actually thin, flowing tendrils, rippled with colors like the northern lights. Jake's clothes hung loosely on her small frame. But what struck him most were her eyes, large, intelligent, and now showing something new, gratitude. "Better?" Jake asked, pointing to her clean state. Elia nodded, then did something unexpected. She placed her hand over her chest and bowed slightly. A formal thank you, Jake realized. He smiled and mimicked the gesture. "You're welcome." Outside, sirens wailed as more emergency vehicles raced toward the crash site. Jake moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. A black SUV drove slowly down his street, men in dark suits looking at each house they passed. "I think we need to keep you hidden," Jake said, turning back to Elia. "At least until we figure things out." Elia looked out the window too, her expression changing to one of fear as she spotted the black SUV. She backed away from the window and made a low, worried sound. "Don't worry," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I won't let them find you." As the night grew deeper, Jake knew one thing for certain: his life had just become infinitely more complicated, and possibly dangerous. But looking at the alien girl now sitting cautiously at his kitchen table, examining a spoon with childlike wonder, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Whatever came next, he would face it. For now, Elia was safe. And somehow, that was all that mattered. Morning light filtered through the blinds as Jake woke with a start. For a moment, he thought the previous night had been a dream, until he heard a soft chirping sound from his living room. Jake had given Elia his bed and slept on the couch. Now he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, examining his collection of car magazines with fascination. Her tendrils swirled with gentle blues and purples as she carefully turned each page. "Good morning," Jake said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Elia looked up and made a melodic sound that he guessed was her version of a greeting. She pointed to a picture of a classic Mustang and then to Jake, tilting her head questioningly. "Yeah, I fix cars," Jake explained, miming turning a wrench. "I'm a mechanic." Understanding dawned in her mercury eyes. She stood up and walked to the window, peering carefully through the blinds. The black SUVs from last night were gone, but Jake knew they wouldn't give up so easily. "Hungry?" Jake asked, making eating motions. Elia nodded slowly. In the kitchen, Jake faced a new challenge: what did aliens eat? He started with simple things: an apple, a piece of bread, a glass of water. Elia sniffed each item carefully before trying them. She seemed to enjoy the apple most, her face lighting up at the sweet taste. As they ate, Jake's phone buzzed with news alerts. Unidentified object crashes outside Greendale. Authorities investigating possible extraterrestrial craft. Witnesses report seeing strange lights in the sky. One headline made Jake's stomach drop. Unusual footprints found leading away from crash site. "They're looking for you," Jake said, showing Elia the phone screen. She couldn't read the words, but the concern in his voice was clear enough. Elia reached out suddenly, placing her cool fingers against Jake's temple. Before he could react, a strange sensation filled his mind, like water flowing into empty spaces. Images flashed before his eyes: a beautiful world with 2 moons, tall crystal structures, beings like Elia living peacefully. Then destruction, explosions, fires, screaming. When she pulled her hand away, Jake gasped. You showed me your home." Elia nodded sadly, placing both hands over her heart. "It's gone," Jake understood. "You're a refugee." Elia reached out again, this time pointing to Jake's heart, then to the house around them, then back to herself with a questioning look. "Yes," Jake said firmly. "You can stay here. You're safe." The tension in Elia's shoulders eased slightly, and her tendril hair shimmered with warmer colors, golds and soft oranges. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Jake signaled for Elia to hide in the bedroom while he answered it. Mark stood on the porch, looking excited. "Jake! Have you seen the news? The whole town's going crazy." "Yeah, I saw," Jake said, trying to block Mark's view into the house. "They're saying it was definitely some kind of spacecraft," Mark continued, trying to peer around Jake. "Everyone's talking about aliens in town. Military guys are going door to door on the east side." That's crazy," Jake stammered. Mark squinted at him. "You okay? You're acting weird." "Just tired. Late night." Mark's eyes fell on something behind Jake, a set of small, wet footprints on the floor that definitely didn't match human feet. "What are those?" Mark asked, pointing. Jake's mind raced. "Art project. I'm trying something new." "Since when do you do art?" Mark laughed, but his eyes remained suspicious. "Look, I really need to get ready for work." "It's Sunday, Jake," Mark cut in. "The shop's closed." Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead. "Right. I meant I have to work on my truck. The transmission's acting up." Mark stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Okay, man. Call me if you want to grab a beer later." As soon as Mark left, Jake rushed to the bedroom. "Elia." She wasn't there. Panic gripped him until he heard a soft chirp from above. Somehow, Elia had climbed up and was now clinging to the ceiling in the corner, her body slightly translucent, blending with the ceiling color. "You can camouflage?" Jake asked in amazement as she dropped lightly to the floor, her skin returning to its normal opalescent blue. Eli made a modest gesture, as if to say it was nothing special. "That's incredible," Jake said, but his smile faded quickly. "But Mark saw your footprints." "I don't think he believed me." Eli's expression grew concerned. She walked to the window again, this time pointing to the sky. "Your ship?" Jake asked. "You want to go back to the crash site?" She nodded vigorously, making urgent chirping sounds. "It's too dangerous," Jake argued. "The whole area is probably surrounded by now." Eli shook her head and pulled something from a hidden pocket in her strange clothing, a small crystal device that fit in her palm. It glowed faintly as she activated it, projecting a holographic image of what looked like a communication device. "There's something at the crash site you need?" Jake guessed. "Something to contact others?" Eli nodded again, her eyes pleading. Jake ran his hand through his hair, considering the risks. The crash site would be heavily guarded. But if the device could help Eli. "We'll go tonight," he decided. "When it's dark." Relief washed over Eli's face. She reached out, touching Jake's hand gently. Her skin felt cool but pleasant against his. The rest of the day passed tensely. Jake watched through the windows as more black SUVs drove through the neighborhood. At one point, two men in suits stood across the street, looking at houses through binoculars. Jake distracted himself by trying to communicate better with Eli. He showed her simple words written on paper, named objects around the house, and tried to understand her chirping language. By evening, she could say his name, Jake, in a musical, trilling voice that made him smile. As darkness fell, Jake prepared for their mission. He dressed in dark clothes and gathered flashlights, water bottles, and a first aid kit in his backpack. He offered Eli one of his black hoodies to cover her distinctive features. "Ready?" he asked as night fully settled in. Eli nodded, her eyes determined despite her obvious fear. They slipped out the back door and cut through yards to reach the edge of town without being seen. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. In the distance, they could see the glow of floodlights at the crash site. "Stay close," Jake whispered. As they entered the woods, Jake felt Eli's cool hand slip into his. He squeezed it reassuringly, surprised at how natural it felt. They crept through the trees, avoiding the main paths. Twice they had to freeze and hide as patrols passed nearby, soldiers with flashlights and dogs searching the underbrush. Finally, they reached a ridge overlooking the crash site. Jake's heart sank. The entire area was a hive of activity, military vehicles, bright lights, scientists in hazmat suits examining every inch of the wreckage. A temporary fence surrounded the perimeter, with armed guards posted every few yards. "This is impossible," Jake whispered. "We can't get in there." But Eli was focused on something else, a small section of the ship that had broken off and landed about 50 yards from the main wreckage. It lay partially hidden under fallen branches, apparently unnoticed by the search teams. She pointed excitedly, making soft chirping sounds. "There?" Jake asked. "What you need is over there." Eli nodded, her tendrils swirling with anticipation. They circled around, keeping to the shadows, until they were as close as they dared to the broken piece of ship. A single guard stood nearby, his back to them as he smoked a cigarette. Eli closed her eyes, concentrating. Her skin began to shift colors, blending perfectly with the forest around them. She looked at Jake and pointed to herself, then to the ship fragment. "Be careful," Jake whispered. He watched in amazement as Eli crept forward, almost invisible in the darkness. She moved with incredible grace, making no sound as she approached the ship fragment. The guard remained oblivious, scrolling through his phone. Eli reached the fragment, quickly searching through it. A moment later, she extracted something small and silvery. But as she turned to come back, her foot snapped a twig. The guard spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Hey! Who's there? The guard's flashlight beam swept wildly through the trees. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he watched Elia freeze, her camouflage ability still active but not perfect in the direct light. The guard squinted, taking a step closer to where she stood motionless among the shadows. "I know someone's there," the guard called out, reaching for the radio on his belt. "Show yourself now." Jake had seconds to act. Grabbing a rock, he threw it far to the left, creating a loud crash in the undergrowth. The guard immediately swung around, pointing his flashlight toward the noise. "This is Post 4, the guard spoke into his radio. "Possible movement in the northeast quadrant." As the guard moved to investigate the sound, Elia seized her chance. She darted from her hiding spot, the small silver device clutched tightly in her hand. Jake caught only glimpses of her, a shimmer here, a flash of movement there, as she raced back toward him. "Go!" Jake whispered urgently when she reached him. Together they retreated deeper into the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Behind them, shouts erupted. Flashlight beams crisscrossed through the trees. A siren blared from the main camp. "They know something's wrong," Jake panted as they ran. "We need to hide." Elia chirped in agreement, pointing to a dense thicket ahead. They dove into the undergrowth just as the sound of dogs barking echoed through the forest. Elia pressed close to Jake, her body trembling slightly. He could feel her rapid heartbeat, or what he assumed was a heart, fluttering against his arm. "It's okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure it was. "Just stay still." For what felt like hours, they remained hidden as search parties combed the woods around them. Finally, the sounds began to fade as the searchers moved to other areas. "I think we're clear," Jake whispered, peering cautiously from their hiding place. "What did you find?" Elia opened her hand, revealing a small silver device about the size of a lighter. It was covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. She pressed a sequence of patterns on its surface, and the device projected a holographic display filled with alien script. Her face fell as she studied the display. With a defeated chirp, she turned it off and slumped against a tree trunk. "What's wrong?" Jake asked. "Isn't that what you needed?" Elia made a series of gestures, pointing to the device, then to the sky, then making a slashing motion across her throat. Jake's stomach tightened as he understood. "The communicator is damaged," he guessed. "You can't call for help." She nodded sadly, her tendril hair dimming to dull blues and grays. "Can it be fixed?" Jake asked, miming a repair action. Elia hesitated, then pointed to Jake's chest and made a series of complex gestures with her hands. "You need parts." Jake guessed. "Tools." She nodded more enthusiastically, then pointed to his phone. "Electronics," Jake understood. "You need electronic components." Another nod, this one accompanied by a hopeful chirp. "I know where we can get those," Jake said, thinking of his workshop at the garage. "But first we need to get back home without being caught." The journey back to town was tense. They stuck to backyards and alleyways, freezing at every passing car or pedestrian. Twice they had to hide as patrol vehicles cruised slowly down the streets, searchlights sweeping across front lawns. When they finally reached Jake's house, they found the door ajar. Someone had been inside. Jake held out his arm, stopping Elia from entering. "Wait here," he whispered, picking up a rake from the side of the house. Cautiously, Jake entered his own home, ready for confrontation. The living room had been searched, drawers pulled open, cushions removed from the couch. In the kitchen, cabinets stood open, their contents disturbed. Jake checked every room before returning to Elia, who waited anxiously outside. "Someone searched the place," he told her. "But they're gone now." Elia entered cautiously, her eyes wide as she took in the disarray. She made a sorrowful sound, touching Jake's arm with an apologetic gesture. "It's not your fault," Jake assured her. But we can't stay here. They'll be back. As if confirming his words, headlights swept across the front window as a vehicle pulled up outside. Jake peeked through the blinds to see a black SUV parking across the street. Out the back, now, he urged. They slipped out the rear door just as knocking sounded at the front. Jake led Eli through the neighbor's yard and down to the main street, keeping to the shadows. We need somewhere safe, Jake muttered, thinking quickly. The garage. I have keys, and no one would think to look for us there. Sullivan's auto shop sat dark and quiet at the edge of town. Jake unlocked the side door, ushering Eli inside before securing it behind them. The familiar smells of oil, rubber, and metal greeted him, normally comforting, but now hardly noticed in his anxiety. We should be safe here for tonight, Jake said, turning on a small desk lamp that wouldn't be visible from outside. And we have tools and parts to fix your communicator. Eli examined the space with obvious interest, touching tools and car parts with curious fingers. She seemed especially fascinated by the hydraulic lift. Jake cleared a space on the workbench and gestured for Eli to show him the communicator. She placed it carefully on the surface, then activated it again. The holographic display appeared, more detailed in the better light. Jake could see flashing red symbols that clearly indicated problems. Show me what you need, he said. Over the next few hours, they worked together, Eli pointing to components she needed, Jake finding substitutes from old radios, phones, and car electronics. Though they couldn't speak each other's language, they developed a rhythm of gestures and sounds that allowed them to communicate surprisingly well. Just before dawn, Eli made an excited chirping sound. The communicator's display had changed from red to blue. She looked at Jake with shining eyes, placing her hand over her heart in that formal gesture of thanks. It's working? Jake asked. Before she could respond, the garage door rattled violently. Someone was trying to get in. Where is she, Jake? Mark's voice called through the door. I know she's with you. Jake and Eli exchanged alarmed looks. He motioned for her to hide under a tarp-covered car while he approached the door. Mark? What are you doing here? Jake called out, trying to sound normal. Cut the crap, Mark replied. I saw the footprints, Jake. Then the men in suits showed up asking questions. You're hiding the alien, aren't you? Jake's mind raced. Mark had been his friend since childhood. Could he trust him? If I let you in, Jake said carefully, you have to come alone. And you have to promise not to tell anyone. A pause. I promise. Jake unlocked the door slowly. Mark stepped inside, alone as promised, but his face was tight with tension. His eyes swept the garage until they landed on the slight movement of the tarp where Eli hid. It's okay, Jake called to her. You can come out. Slowly, Eli emerged from hiding, her tendrils swirling with cautious colors. Mark's jaw dropped. Holy! He whispered. She's real. Her name is Eli, Jake said. She's not dangerous. She's a refugee, Mark. Her world was destroyed. Mark stared at the alien girl, his expression shifting from shock to wonder. And the government is hunting her. Yes, Jake confirmed. We just fixed her communicator. She needs to contact her people. Mark ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. Jake, they've got roadblocks on every road out of town. They're searching house by house. It's only a matter of time before they find you. Eli stepped forward, her movement graceful despite her obvious fear. She held out the communicator to Mark, activating the display. It showed what looked like a map of the solar system, with a pulsing light near the edge. Her people, Jake translated. They're coming for her, but we need to keep her safe until they arrive. Mark looked between them, his decision visible in his eyes before he spoke. My family has a cabin, he said finally. In the mountains. No one knows about it except me. You can hide there until her ride comes. Relief flooded through Jake. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mark warned. Getting out of town won't be easy. And if we're caught? He left the sentence unfinished. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. In a few hours, the town would be awake, the search intensifying. Jake looked at Eli, who watched him with those intelligent mercury eyes. He had come too far to give up now. We'll leave tonight, Jake decided. After dark. Mark nodded grimly. I'll create a distraction on the east side of town. That should draw some of them away from the west road. As they began planning their escape, Jake felt Eli's cool hand slip into his. When he looked at her, she pointed to the communicator's display, where the pulsing light had moved slightly closer to Earth. Help was coming. They just had to survive long enough to meet it. Darkness blanketed the town of Greendale as Jake, Eli, and Mark gathered in the back of the garage. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Their escape plan was risky, one wrong move could mean disaster for all of them. The roadblocks are strongest on the main roads, Mark explained, showing them a hand-drawn map. But there's an old logging trail that cuts through the western woods. It's rough terrain, but my truck can handle it. Jake nodded, checking the bag of supplies he'd packed, food, water, first aid supplies, and extra parts for Eli's communicator. The alien girl stood nearby, her skin reflecting the dim lamplight in subtle waves of color. Her tendril hair moved gently, showing shades of deep purple and blue, anxiety, Jake had learned to recognize. It's going to be okay, he told her softly. Eli chirped quietly in response, touching her hand to his arm in a gesture that had become familiar between them. I've got the distraction ready, Mark said, holding up his phone. Remote starter on some fireworks at the abandoned mill. When they go off, every official in town will head that way. The plan was set. Mark would leave first in his truck and wait at the edge of the logging trail. 10 minutes later, he would trigger the fireworks. In the chaos, Jake and Eli would slip out of town on Jake's motorcycle, avoiding the roads entirely by cutting through backyards and fields until they reached the meeting point. If anything goes wrong, Mark said seriously, the cabin coordinates are here. He handed Jake a sealed envelope. Don't open it unless you have to. The friends clasped hands, a gesture weighted with the gravity of what they were attempting. Be careful, Jake said. Mark nodded, then looked at Eli. Your people better be worth all this trouble. Eli seemed to understand the sentiment if not the exact words. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed slightly, her gesture of deepest respect. Mark left, disappearing into the night. Jake and Eli waited in tense silence, counting down the minutes. The communicator in Eli's pocket pulsed with a gentle blue light, its display showing the approaching ship moving steadily closer. Almost time, Jake whispered, checking his watch. He handed Eli a helmet for the motorcycle. Put this on. It'll hide your face. She examined it curiously before slipping it over her head, her tendril hair somehow compressing to fit inside. Through the visor, her mercury eyes watched him with trust that made his chest tight with responsibility. Right on schedule, a distant boom echoed across town, followed by flashes of light in the eastern sky. Almost immediately, sirens wailed as emergency vehicles raced toward the source. That's our cue, Jake said, wheeling his motorcycle out the back door. Hold on tight. Eli climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. Her touch was cool but comforting as Jake kicked the bike to life and sped off into the night, keeping the headlight off to avoid detection. They cut through Mrs. Peterson's garden, jumped the low fence behind the high school, and crossed the baseball field, all places Jake knew well from growing up in this small town. Now these familiar landmarks were waypoints on an escape route, a path away from the place he'd called home his entire life. As they neared the edge of town, Jake's heart sank. Despite Mark's distraction, a roadblock remained on the western road, 2 black SUVs and several armed men checking vehicles. Change of plan, Jake muttered, veering off into the thicker woods. The motorcycle wasn't meant for off-road travel, but they had no choice. Branches whipped past as they bounced over rough terrain, Eli clinging tighter with each jolt. Behind them, shouts rang out. Someone had spotted them. Hang on. Jake called as he pushed the motorcycle harder, weaving between trees at dangerous speeds. The sound of engines revving told him they were being pursued. Just when it seemed they might outrun their pursuers, the motorcycle hit a hidden ditch. The front wheel caught, sending both riders flying. Jake hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his shoulder. Eli landed more gracefully several feet away, her alien physiology apparently better suited for absorbing impacts. Run! Jake gasped, struggling to his feet. Go! But Eli didn't run. Instead, she rushed to Jake's side, helping him up with surprising strength for her small frame. The motorcycle was damaged beyond quick repair, its front wheel bent at an unnatural angle. They're coming, Jake said, hearing engines approaching. We have to hide. Eli looked around quickly, then pointed to a dense thicket of thorny bushes. Before Jake could protest, she pulled him toward it. As they reached the bushes, Eli placed her palm against the thorns, and to Jake's amazement, the plants seemed to respond, parting to create a small passage. They squeezed through just as headlights swept across the area where they had crashed. Inside the thicket, Jake stared at Eli in astonishment. You can communicate with plants? She made a modest gesture, as if to say it was a simple thing. Jake shook his head in wonder. There was still so much he didn't know about her. The men searched for nearly an hour, flashlight beams passing within inches of their hiding spot multiple times. Yet somehow, the thorny bushes concealed them perfectly, almost as if they were cooperating with Eli's wishes. When the search finally moved further away, Jake checked his watch. We're late meeting Mark. He'll be worried. Using the coordinates from the envelope, they set off on foot through the forest. Jake's shoulder throbbed with each step, but Eli helped support him. Her night vision proved far superior to his. She guided them unerringly through the darkness, avoiding pitfalls and obstacles Jake would have stumbled into. After 2 hours of difficult travel, they spotted the headlights of Mark's truck parked at the trailhead. Mark rushed to meet them, relief evident on his face. What happened? I was about to come looking for you. Crashed the bike, Jake explained tersely. They're searching the woods. Get in, quick, Mark urged, helping Jake into the truck while Eli climbed into the back seat. The drive to the cabin was tense and silent. Every set of headlights they passed made them shrink down in their seats. Twice they had to detour around checkpoints, adding hours to their journey. But by dawn, the truck was winding up a remote mountain road, far from the searching eyes of Greendale. The cabin was small but sturdy, nestled among tall pines with a view of the valley below. As they stepped inside, exhaustion hit Jake like a physical force. His injured shoulder screamed for attention. You need rest, Mark said, noting Jake's pallor. I'll keep watch. While Mark secured the perimeter, Eli tended to Jake's shoulder with gentle hands. She applied a salve from a small pouch she carried. It smelled of mint and something alien, that immediately eased the pain. Thank you, Jake murmured as she finished bandaging the injury. Eli chirped softly, then surprised him by speaking his name more clearly than before, Jake. She touched his cheek gently, her mercury eyes holding his for a long moment. That afternoon, as Jake rested on the small cabin couch, Eli's communicator began pulsing more rapidly. She showed the display to Jake and Mark. The ship was now visibly closer, perhaps only hours away. They're almost here, Mark said, peering at the display. Then this will all be over. Jake nodded, but felt a strange hollowness at the thought. He had risked everything to help Eli reach her people, so why did the prospect of success fill him with such sadness? As dusk approached, they gathered outside the cabin. The communicator now pulsed steadily, its light growing brighter by the minute. Eli pointed to the evening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "There," Mark suddenly said, pointing to a moving light that was too fast and too purposeful to be a plane. The light grew larger, descending toward the mountain clearing near the cabin. As it neared, they could make out the shape of a sleek craft, similar to Eli's crashed ship but much larger. It hovered silently before settling on the ground with barely a whisper of sound. Eli's tendrils swirled with bright colors, gold, pink, joyful greens, as she watched the ship's ramp extend. 3 figures emerged, clearly of her species but taller, with more elaborate tendrils that Jake guessed signified age or status. "Her family?" Mark whispered. "I think so," Jake replied, feeling both happiness for her and a growing sense of loss. Eli turned to them, her eyes shining with emotion. She took Jake's hands in hers and pressed something into his palm, her communicator. "I can't take this," Jake protested. She chirped insistently, closing his fingers around the device. Then she placed her hand against his temple one last time. Images flowed into his mind, not of destruction this time, but of gratitude, friendship, and a promise to return. When she stepped back, tears streaked Jake's face. "I'll miss you," he said simply. Eli touched her heart, then his, a gesture that needed no translation. As she walked toward her people, a commotion erupted from the forest edge. Flashlights appeared, followed by shouts and the sound of vehicles approaching. Somehow, they had been found. "Go!" Jake called to Eli. "Hurry!" The alien girl hesitated, looking back at the humans who had risked everything for her. Then one of her people took her arm, urging her toward the ship. As armed men burst into the clearing, the ship's ramp was already closing. Jake and Mark raised their hands in surrender, watching as the craft lifted silently into the air. "Federal agents! Don't move," a voice shouted as men in tactical gear surrounded them. But Jake wasn't afraid anymore. He watched the ship ascend, becoming just another light among the stars. In his hand, the communicator gave one final pulse before going dark, not broken, but dormant, waiting. A tall man in a black suit approached Jake, his face stern. "You have a lot to answer for, Mr. Miller." "Maybe," Jake replied calmly. "Or maybe I have a lot to teach you." As they were led away in handcuffs, Jake felt no regret. The sky above seemed vaster now, filled with possibilities he had never imagined before. Eli was safe with her people, and humanity had its first real proof that they were not alone in the universe. And somewhere in that vast sky, Jake knew she was looking back, remembering the human who had not been afraid to touch the dirty alien girl, and whose world had been forever changed because of it.